Australia's always had a bit of an interesting history when it comes to games getting released over here, and while we're not quite as strict as other countries like Germany tend to be, throughout the years there's been plenty of titles that have been on the receiving end of the old ban hammer. And there never seemed to be any kind of consistency to any of this stuff either. I mean, a game might be banned or censored for reasons relating to the violence, but then also anything including something like drug use seemed to be frowned upon as well. Either way though, there's been a whole lot of games that suffered the brunt of bad decision making from the Australian ratings board, either having things toned down or banned entirely. So I thought it'd be a fun old time to go back and take a look at some of the more memorable examples over the years. You know, the ones that I've had the most experience with. I will say as well that this isn't supposed to be any kind of definitive list either. It's just a few of the titles that resonate with me the most. Not to mention one I've actually had personal connections to, having played them myself.
Come get some.
Having said all that, let's get into it.
Never mind.
Starting off with what's one of the earliest games I can remember playing that ever got censored, and that's 3D Realms' Duke Nukem 3D from way back in 1997.
Blow it out your ass.
Now I can still remember when we bought the full version of this thing from good old Harvey Norman and brought it home, where we immediately installed it on the family computer, only to then load up the first level, play for a bit, only to start noticing that things weren't quite the way I remembered them from the shareware version. Because as it turns out, this version of the game has been censored. And it's like whoever had the unfortunate job of coming up with that stuff really just found the best way possible to remove all of the fun elements from the game, namely the violence and the adult content. Which meant that all those gorgeous gore effects, you know, all that good stuff when you blow enemies up with the RPG or the pipe bomb and see their limbs flying all over the place, was completely removed. Instead, what happens now is when you hit an enemy with an explosive, their sprite just ceases to exist and it disappears entirely. It's even more diminished when you're using the shrink ray, as it's like the enemies have just gotten trapped under the bottom of Duke's boot or something. The other thing is that all of the so-called mature content is missing as well. And right off the bat in Hollywood Holocaust, you'll notice that the theatre isn't even playing a film anymore, along with some of the posters around the building also missing.
Not like this. Not like this.
In the next level in the red light district, once you get to the video store, all of those screens in the back with the different boosts now just have static on them instead of those short loops. And again, various posters throughout the environment are missing completely. Along with that lady hanging out by the bar near the end of the level, who I always kind of thought looked a bit like Jill Valentine. But by far, what's the funniest omission is in the strip club, because now this thing is just completely empty. And when all of these dancing podiums pop up, no one's even inside them. In fact, it seems pretty much every single female-related sprite in the game had to be removed.
Hey! This is bullshit!
One of these changes actually ruins one of the game's more clever references too, during the Alcatraz level where you escape through that hole in the cell wall. Because originally that hole had a poster over it as a bit of a homage to the Shawshank Redemption, only now there's nothing at all.
Nothing at all! Nothing at all!
I mean, even the sushi train in episode 3 didn't get spared, with all of those random little sprites of various body parts missing as well.
Come on now, dawg. Come on, man.
Now luckily, despite all of this, there still was a way to turn this stuff back on, and with a bit of MS-DOS savvy, you could apply a patch that would update the game, restoring all of this lost content.
You wanna dance?
And yeah, really letting the player experience the game the way that it was meant to be played. Something that I still have to thank my dad for doing for me multiple times. Oh yeah, and you can actually still easily see what this mode was really like by simply turning on that optional parental lock in the options menu. What I've always kind of thought is hilarious about this one is how later on with both Blood and Shadow Warrior, the thing is that neither of these games seem to kick up a stink at all. Which is kind of funny considering they're easily way more violent than Duke Nukem was.
Very bad man.
I mean, not to mention how in Shadow Warrior you could have a peek on a bunch of girls taking a bath. Duke Nukem's violence on the one hand is almost all against aliens and those mutated pig cops, whereas those other games have a lot of violence directed towards other humans, notably the cultists in Blood and the ninjas in Shadow Warrior. Using explosives against the cultists in Blood, you can literally blow the flesh off their bones. And then using melee weapons against the ninjas in Shadow Warrior is going to have Lo Wang covered head to toe in buckets of the red stuff.
You hot man you used to be.
Sometimes you'd even see the ninjas commit suicide, which was far more graphic than anything we got in Duke Nukem 3D. But as this video is soon going to come to show, in what's a bit of a running theme that's going on here, is that clearly the people in charge of making those decisions didn't even play these games to begin with.
I'm gonna get medieval.
Right, so before I get too far into things, I do have to thank Factor75 for sponsoring this video. Now, if you're anything like me, during the day you probably spend a fair bit of time getting distracted by work and playing games, which means I usually can't be bothered or even want to think about spending half an hour in the kitchen to make something to eat. Plus, I also don't really want to go out and get something that's been deep fried in motor oil or spend $50 on a single meal and delivery charges through one of those delivery platforms. Well, Factor75 offers up a solution with stress-free, ready-to-eat meals. Yeah, fresh, never frozen meals that are made by chefs and approved by dietitians, ready to eat in just 2 minutes. With 35 options that are different every week, including keto, high protein, and vegetarian choices. Plus, there's also 60 various snack options there as well, with breakfasts, smoothies, and juices. Just kind of eliminates all the hassling with prep time, cooking, and cleaning up, so you can simply heat up your food and get back to your day, doing what you do best. So to get 50% off your first Factor box and 20% off your next month of orders, be sure to click that link in the video description or scan the QR code on the screen with your phone. Oh yeah, and once again, thanks to Factor75 for sponsoring this video.
Get us out of here, kid!
Now, when Grand Theft Auto 3 first came out, it really was one of those watershed moments for the gaming industry, and you could kind of tell from this point on, things would never be the same.
I see nothing but good things for you, my boy.
Not only for the way that it presented this humongous, lifelike world for the player to explore, but also the sense of realism the whole thing had, and how technology was really getting to that point where the virtual world could start to replicate reality. Which also meant that it put it in the crosshairs for ire from a bunch of video game critics. GTA 3 for the PS2 was also the first game I ever bought with my own money, and I can still remember picking it up one day after school and then rushing home and loading the whole thing up for the first time. Sadly, I ended up buying it just a couple of days too late because only the week earlier, unbeknownst to me, had it been pulled from the shelves, with it having something to do with the way the player could interact with the various ladies of the night of Liberty City.
We're talking about sex, right?
Right.
And even then, like, it wasn't the fact that you could pick up prostitutes, it was the fact that you could pick up prostitutes and then kill them immediately after to get all your money back.
And modern problems require modern solutions.
Which, I mean, look, if nothing else, is really just the kind of amazing, world-building attention to detail that Rockstar have always been known for. And it's like, despite all the notoriety this game garnered upon release, based off all the violence and carnage it could cause, the thing that upset the Aussie government the most here wasn't any of that. Yeah, being able to drive around in a fully 3D world, which for the time was groundbreaking by the way, running over civilians and getting into all-out warfare with the police and military apparently was fine. But I don't know, man, like killing hookers, well, that's just one step too far. Did kind of start a bit of a trend there too, where Rockstar Games were really kind of seen as these bad boys, having a pretty rocky track record for the ensuing years when it comes to their games being released in Australia. I mean, I doubt anyone's forgotten all the drama over the whole hot coffee minigame in San Andreas, and Manhunt was also just outright banned over here entirely, with it being illegal to even sell copies of it. So probably as a result of that, when it came to Manhunt 2, they didn't even bother trying to get it classified in Australia at all. What's also interesting about the Manhunt series is when you compare it to the Saw games, both of which were released in Australia, and also games that feature innocent people in as brutal, if not more so, scenarios than anything in the Manhunt games. Still though, if history has taught us anything, it's that trying to stop someone from doing something is just going to make people want to do it even more. And that was certainly the case with GTA 3. Now, another game from the early 2000s that also stirred up a bit of drama was Running with Scissors' undisputed masterpiece, Postal 2.
My video camera.
Compared to GTA 3 though, which was only censored, Postal 2 was outright banned in Australia, despite it still being very easy to get a copy, and in fact, I still have my original pirated disc of the game that I got back in 2003. Yeah, you know, back when people used to burn things to CDRs.
You gotta be fucking kidding.
Anyway, the premise is you're playing as the aptly named Postal dude, just a regular guy married to an absolute battle axe, and living in a rundown, shitty part of Arizona just trying to make ends meet. With the story taking place day to day over the course of a week, where objectives involve carrying out the most mundane tasks you could ever think of, all of which usually end in violence, as things progressively escalated and became far more unhinged.
We're serious! Send Gary out now and nobody gets hurt!
So for instance, like one of the earliest things you gotta do in the game is collect your paycheck, before the place you work at is stormed by violent video game protesters.
Come on everyone, follow me!
Then as early as Wednesday, you're kidnapped by rednecks.
I done busted up his head.
And have to escape a brewery while dressed up in a gimp suit.
Oh great, now my day is complete.
Or how about that mission where the local church is attacked by terrorists? But what's kind of funny about Postal 2 is that outside of a few moments, you never actually have to go around killing people or causing mayhem. I mean, there's moments during the story missions where you're left with no other option, but a lot of the time you can just run right past people and leave them be. So in the case of that poor, defenseless marching band who seem outright out of place in Postal 2's world, I mean, it's not like anyone's got a gun to your head telling you to douse them all in petrol and light them up. There's even an achievement they added into the Steam version of the game that you get for beating the whole thing without making any kills. Is it fun that way? Not really. Is it possible? Well, absolutely.
Yeah, you're cool, go away.
And I've always thought that that's what's been so fun about the Postal series, is how they just put the player in these bizarre settings and let them decide if their own dark desires are going to take over. And when it comes to the violence, it doesn't discriminate either. It makes fun of everyone, various political and religious ideals, and it lets the player choose how they're going to interact with all of these different factions. Even in just a basic sense, like if you want to wait in line when you gotta buy some milk, or be a total asshole and try to skip the queue. The premise the game tries to propose is, at what point do you finally flip your lid and go postal? Like, at what point do you finally just say, fuck it, and let loose? But of course, like so many other things, irony and context is completely lost on those people who made the big decisions. So the game is ultimately banned in Kangaroo Land either way. In fact, it wasn't even until July of this year that the ban officially got appealed, which means that Aussies can finally and legally play this best version of the game, considering that Running with Scissors have been updating it throughout the years, even as recently as in 2023, when they added in a whole bunch of improvements into the base game. So yeah, like if you've ever wanted to light someone on fire and piss on their ashes, well, there's never been a better time. Next up is the Punisher game from 2005. Truly one of the all-time most underrated and underappreciated games ever made.
Let's go back to the beginning.
Developed by Volition, it was a third-person shooter based around the mid-2000s Garth Ennis period of the comics, as well as being loosely based off the movie which came out around the same time.
You hurt me!
With Thomas Jane even coming back to voice Frank again, and again, doing a damn good job at it.
Quite a time you've been having lately, eh, Castle? How many people have you killed in the last few weeks?
Not sure. There were a lot of explosions.
Now anyone who's played the game is probably going to tell you how faithful it was to the character. And yeah, like that's a fairly accurate assessment. And look, I mean, like it wasn't an amazing game at any stretch, but there was definitely something enjoyable there about causing bad guy genocide as everyone's favourite PTSD suffering vigilante. Going around shooting dudes with various weapons or executing them after using them as a human shield. Along with completely flipping your lid and going into a rage mode with nothing but a knife. But what garnered the most attention here and ultimately caused the game to be censored worldwide was the apparent torture methods used throughout the game. Which again is like an incredibly bizarre thing to focus on, especially considering the context. I mean, this so-called torture is, in reality, the way that Frank interrogates all the various criminals he comes across.
Security station downstairs. Hidden panel in corridor. Turn the picture.
You see, a big focus of the gameplay is trying to get information from all these different deadbeats, like pinning them under a dangling rack of kitchen knives or holding them up over shark-infested waters. You know, basic stuff. All of which is fucking awesome.
I will tell you nothing!
Not to mention, incredibly creative. I mean, some of the stuff in this game is early Friday the 13th movie tier, and you really do feel like Jason Voorhees, finding the most elaborate ways to potentially kill all of these people. The only difference is, unlike Jason, you're not killing the good guys. And those unfortunate people who find themselves under the wheels of a forklift or shoved face first into an open flame are people of less than scrupulous moral fiber. I mean, it's not like any of these people are Boy Scouts, you know what I'm saying?
I ain't telling you shit.
But what's also more important to consider is that if you ever accidentally kill these people, it counts as failing the interrogation and you actually end up losing points. So if anything, killing people, you know, despite it being highly entertaining, is treated as a bad thing. Even though in reality, like in a Punisher game, the more you kill people, the more points you should be getting.
You're goddamn right.
Especially in something like this where there's a lot of theatricality.
Not gonna find Ma and Eddie around here.
Anyway, it seems a solution to this was just to censor the game worldwide, like putting this weird filter over the top of the image to downplay the blood and gore effects.
What is going on out there, damn it?
Along with outright just not showing any of that good stuff at all, and zooming in on Frank's face. Still though, an easily downloadable patch puts all of this content back in, leaving only one crime remaining, that being that we still haven't had any kind of proper remaster for this absolute hidden gem.
At warehouse door. Use code 7729. Won't set off alarm.
Oh yeah, and while we're on the subject of games having to be modified worldwide, we've got Fallout 3 in 2008. Yeah, Bethesda's classic action RPG that people seem to either love or hate based off the time of the month. But love it or hate it, it offered up a whole heap of role-playing opportunities for the player, giving you this vast shithole of a wasteland to explore, and letting you decide on what kind of person you were going to be.
Really? Thank you.
Even being able to detonate a small nuke early on in the game and obliterate an entire town, no doubt killing all of its inhabitants. But again, like, that's not what the issue was.
You know why.
Because again, the issue didn't come from the violence, the writing, or the subject matter, but instead the way the game lets players use various drugs, with the particular problem here being the use of morphine as a health item.
What?
So as a result, they simply changed the name of the item from morphine to MedX, instantly removing any dramas and allowing the game to be rated. And it really is like another example of how the people who make these decisions completely seem to ignore both context and consequence. Because if they'd actually taken the time to play Fallout 3, then they'd know that the game outright penalizes the player for taking drugs too much. Seeing as how one of the main mechanics of taking drugs over and over was that you'd eventually get addicted to them and suffer from withdrawals. Where at that point, the player's stats would even be lowered, unless you either took more of the drug, essentially just getting yourself into this nasty cycle, or going to a clinic and having a doctor remove the addiction, which often cost in-game money.
Alright, I got some of this pre-war stuff. Should flush your system right out.
So yeah, like it's not like you could just shoot this stuff up all day without any kind of fallout, no pun intended. I do want to say as well that I've always found it funny when games are banned over drug-related reasons, considering that Australia is fast becoming the recreational cocaine capital of the world, where weekend nose beers have become about as commonplace as a Vegemite sandwich.
Well, holy shit.
So yeah, like if you've ever wondered why it's been called MedX in every Fallout game ever since and not morphine, well, for a big part of that, you've got Australia's backwards ass rating boards to thank. You're welcome. But hey, like we also gave you guys Margot Robbie and Samara Weaving, so I think we've paid our dues. Now, Fear 2 is another interesting title to talk about as well. The sequel to what's easily one of the best first-person shooters ever made. It puts you into the boots of another reflex-gifted soldier named Beckett. Again, letting you mow down countless droves of enemy soldiers with all manner of weaponry, and in glorious slow motion. And I know that a lot of people have their gripes with this game for different reasons, but even despite it being weaker than its predecessor in some pretty indisputable ways, the whole thing's still a damn good experience. With some great set pieces and awesome shootouts. Looking at footage for it as well, you'd probably wonder what it was that got the Aussie government's feathers all ruffled up. And apparently this is yet another title where they took issue with the violence. Which is kind of funny as well when you consider how many people specifically disliked Fear 2, because they thought the combat and the gore aspects were actually downgraded. Either way though, for whatever reason, the game was originally banned over it. Before later being appealed on the basis that the violence wasn't that realistic. Yeah, no shit. But I guess the scene at the end where Beckett strapped into a chair and sexually assaulted by Alma during the final boss fight is somehow okay.
Let me see that again. I didn't get a good look at that.
Yeah, remember that infamous finale where she imprisons the guy into this kind of mental battle with one of his former buddies, all while she hops up there and rides on that disco stick? Even getting knocked up in the process and being visibly pregnant by the end.
Just hit me out.
So the lesson to learn here is that apparently a man getting molested and impregnating a woman against his will is all fine and dandy. But blowing apart hostile soldiers with a shotgun, well, hang on now, that's a little bit too far. Also, what I'd argue as well is that the violence in Fear 3 is way worse than it was in Fear 2 as well, especially in the way that certain environments would even use bodily fluids and body parts as set dressing. But again, like, noticing something like that would mean that the people making these decisions would actually have to play the games, and you know what? That's far too much effort. And really, they're probably just too tired to do that. You know? I'm tired too. I get it. Overall, 2009 really was just the year it seemed for stupid video game takes.
Welcome to Africa.
Never forget that 2009 was the year that RE5 came out, and dickhead journalists all around the world got up in arms about how a game set in Africa was somehow racist for having you shoot African people.
What?
2009 was also the year that Left 4 Dead 2 came out as well, which is another game that got outright gimped upon release in Australia. And everyone I'm pretty sure knows what happened here. I mean, it's probably one of the most infamous censorships of all time. And anyone who was around back then is probably going to remember just how bad it was.
I was there, Gandalf. I was there 3,000 years ago.
Now, one of the main things that Left 4 Dead 2 absolutely excelled at and improved upon over the first game was the updated gore, where you could more or less shoot or carve entire chunks out of the zombies, often revealing their internal organs and even seeing bits of their spine or ribcage. And I still think one of the most impressive details is how if you shot someone in the stomach, their intestines could fall out, dragging along the ground behind them. So yeah, like, this stuff was really impressive and advanced for the time. And even to this day, like, there's very few games that even come close to beating it. But of course, all of that violence against people who are literally dead to begin with was perceived as unacceptable. And what we ended up with is what has to be one of the worst censorship jobs of all time, where instead of just toning down the gore effects, they instead removed everything, like literally. Because whenever you killed a zombie now, their body would just kind of fall to the ground before quickly vanishing into thin air.
Reloading! Reloading!
And with bigger explosions like from the pipe bombs or grenade launchers, that'll also make them completely disappear. The funniest example there too is when you kill a tank and the thing almost evaporates before it's even hit the ground. And when zombies were hit with a Molotov cocktail, they wouldn't light up on fire, but they'd still have the animation that they were. And the whole thing really was just taking the piss. Which really meant that what they'd done here was take this highly anticipated sequel and make it even more basic than even the first game. However, I do remember that within days, if not hours, there was a readily available and well-known fix to this, by modifying a single line of code in one of the configuration files. Yeah, turns out all you had to do was swap a couple of numbers around, and it unlocked the full version with all of these new effects. And it's always been my theory that whoever shared that information online had to be someone who worked for Valve, and maybe wasn't happy with the way the game was being treated down under. Either way though, all that matters is that it instantly fixed the problem. The only caveat was that if you tried playing online, it'd only match you with people who were using this trick. But seeing as most people at the time seemed to know about it, this was hardly a problem. It eventually became a non-issue in 2013 when we finally got that long-awaited R18 rating, which really couldn't have been better timing either, considering that 2013 was the year that GTA 5 came out. And to even see the game in this mode anymore, you need to add in a custom launch parameter through Steam. But it's still easily the best example of gaming censorship at its absolute worst, and without a doubt, one of the most egregious examples.
What the hell is that?
Speaking of zombies, there's also House of the Dead Overkill, another game that was originally banned for similar reasons due to its so-called high-impact violence. And yes, once again, just absolutely highlighting the oblivious double standards of the people making these decisions. Because you want to know what else came out in 2011? How about Dead Space 2? You know, a game that opens up with a guy being converted into more or less a space zombie in real time, where you get to watch this badass animation of the dude's body ripping itself apart as he succumbs to that virus and turns into one of the necromorphs. But yeah, let's try to ban the obviously tongue-in-cheek zombie game. The one where you fight Swamp Thing and a giant bloated stripper zombie. And yes, technically they're not wrong in that Overkill does absolutely have excessive over-the-top violence. But then again, that's the whole point of the game. Not to mention where a lot of the humor and the appeal comes from. Because in case it wasn't blatantly fucking obvious from the get-go, this is a game that's really not meant to be taken seriously.
Damn it, Cindy. Have you lost weight?
You know, in case the whole exploitation, grindhouse aesthetic wasn't clear enough to begin with.
Get ready to be titillated, tantalized, and teased by tasseled-tittied temptresses.
I mean, one of the main characters, Isaac Washington, is introduced as being such a badass that if you get in his way, he's gonna rip your balls off.
I'm gonna rip your motherfucking balls off!
And the other protagonists are a couple of strippers with so much cleavage that if someone dressed like that in real life, there's not enough willpower in the world to prevent the average man from taking a peek.
Then are you going to try to find Papa Caesar?
Listen, sister, I don't try anything. I just get up and do it.
Get a good look, Costanza?
Or how about what happens after the final boss fight, with the main antagonist crawling back into the gaping birth canal of his humongous zombified mother? I mean, if that's not giving you a fair idea of how outlandish and silly the whole game is, then nothing will.
Make him mad, and he'll rip your balls off.
This isn't actually the first time a House of the Dead game has caused drama in Australia either, and I can still remember back when the first game was in the arcades, where they had this black curtain around the machine so people couldn't see it from a distance. But even that first game is a good example of how the gore and the violence has played such a big part in the series for so many years. And what made those earlier entries so appealing and unique was how you could literally shoot the enemies to pieces, which was something that really hadn't been done that much yet. The violence was a seminal component to the charm, much in the same way the violence is important in a franchise like Mortal Kombat, which, funnily enough, also got banned in Australia with that reboot that came out in 2011. At least though, again, there is a happy ending to this one, considering that Sega managed to appeal the ban, successfully getting it overturned and allowing the game to get released. which is a good thing as everyone should play through this at least once in their life. And I genuinely don't think that I've ever laughed as hard or as frequently playing a video game as I have with House of the Dead Overkill.
What the fuck?
As for the more recent years, well, there hasn't quite been as many cases of censored or banned games, luckily. And I'd probably say the most well-known example is what happened to South Park: The Stick of Truth back in 2013, where the game again got censored over a couple of questionable scenes involving the main characters. And in a move that is absolutely on brand, they replaced all of the censored and removed scenes with footage of a crying koala. Hotline Miami 2 also never got released here either, and I remember that the devs' response to that was just to encourage people to pirate the game. It's kind of interesting too how graphics and realism over the years have improved so much, but yet the amount of drama around this stuff seems to have almost diminished. I mean, look at some of those gore effects in a game like Red Dead 2, for instance, which are way more graphic than anything in Rockstar's previous efforts. But yet for some reason, that stuff just went completely overlooked. Thank God. Either way though, I'm sure at some point in the future, there's going to be something coming out that gets the government's panties in a twist all over again. And it's really just a matter of when, not if. And with that said, it about brings me onto the end of the video. So if there's any other games you can think of that you remember kicking up a stink, be sure to let me know in the comments below. And as always, thanks for watching.